Hollywood stood still. The cameras, the lights, the red carpets, all of it felt meaningless on the day Robert Redford was laid to rest. At 89 years old, one of cinema's last true rebels was gone, and thousands gathered to say goodbye. But no one was prepared for what came next. As mourners wiped their tears and legends filled the front rows, his wife stepped forward. Her voice trembled, her hands clutched the paper, but her words cut through the silence like thunder. She wasn't just delivering a eulogy, she was sharing the final message Robert whispered before he left this world. And those last words, they weren't just a farewell to his family, they weren't just a declaration of love. They carried a weight that stunned Hollywood itself, leaving even the most hardened icons struggling to hold back tears. Because Robert Redford's final goodbye wasn't simply about death, it was about life, about the battles he fought, the secrets he carried, and the legacy he knew he was leaving behind. Tonight, we uncover that moment, the funeral that shook Hollywood, the tribute that silenced thousands, and the last words Robert Redford left to the woman who loved him most. The sun set slowly over Utah's mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. It wasn't a Hollywood stage, it wasn't a glamorous premiere, it was the final curtain call for Robert Redford, and the silence in the air said more than words ever could. Thousands had come, actors, directors, old friends, even political figures who once fought alongside him. Some wore black suits, others simple coats, but every face carried the same expression: disbelief. The man who once embodied rebellion and hope was gone. Reporters tried to capture the moment, but no headline could match the weight of reality. Social media filled with tributes, yet in that moment, even the loudest platforms seemed quiet. It wasn't just the funeral of a man, it felt like the funeral of an era. And then, as the crowd shifted and the whispers died down, all eyes turned to one person: his wife, the woman who had stood beside him through decades of battles, triumphs, and quiet nights in the mountains. She wasn't there to give a speech. She was there to share his truth, and the words she spoke next would change everything. She stepped to the podium, her hands trembling as she unfolded the paper. But it wasn't just a speech. It was a window into the man Robert Redford truly was. Not the Hollywood legend, not the political voice, but the husband, the father, the soul she had loved for decades. Her voice cracked with every sentence. She spoke of his laughter at home, the way he painted in silence, the nights he'd stare at the stars and whisper about life's mysteries. The room that had been frozen in grief began to weep. Actors who never showed emotion in public wiped their eyes. Directors bowed their heads. She told stories no one had ever heard. The little things that made Robert human. The way he still fixed broken chairs in their house himself. The way he hated goodbyes. The way he always believed love was stronger than fame. But as the tribute went on, the tone shifted. Her voice grew heavier, her tears harder to control. She paused, clutched the microphone, and revealed what no one expected her to share: Robert Redford's final words before he closed his eyes forever. The room froze. Every breath seemed to vanish. His wife leaned forward, her voice breaking as she repeated the last words he whispered in her ear. They weren't grand, polished, or rehearsed. They were raw. They were real. Words that carried both love and a haunting warning. She told the crowd that in his final moments, Robert didn't speak of awards or fame. He spoke of her. He spoke of the life they built, and he spoke of what he feared Hollywood had lost. Gasps echoed through the hall. People clutched their chests. Even seasoned stars who had seen everything in this industry sat in stunned silence. Those words cut deeper than any role he ever played, deeper than any speech he ever gave. Because in the end, Robert Redford didn't leave behind just a legacy. He left behind a message. A message that wasn't just for his wife. It was for everyone sitting in that room, and for Hollywood itself. But the meaning behind those words was even darker, and it left the industry shaken to its core. What did those words really mean? To his wife, they were a whisper of love, a reminder that even as life slipped away, she was the anchor that kept him whole. But to the world listening, they sounded like something else. A warning, a confession, a plea. Robert Redford had lived through the golden age of cinema, through scandals and transformations that reshaped Hollywood again and again. His final words hinted at what he believed had been lost: truth, passion, authenticity. He had fought his entire career to protect those things, and now, as he slipped into silence, it was as if he was begging others not to let them die with him. The press later debated their meaning. Some claimed it was purely personal. Others argued it was a coded message about his legacy. But in that room, no one cared about interpretation. They felt the weight of a man speaking from the edge of eternity. And as his wife revealed revealed those words, a shiver ran through Hollywood. This wasn't just a goodbye, it was a challenge, a dare to carry the torch he left behind. And in that moment, the industry realized it had just been handed a responsibility far heavier than it expected. The reaction was immediate. Actors who had once shared the screen with him were seen crying openly. Directors who had built their reputations at Sundance stood in silence, visibly shaken. Politicians who had admired his activism released statements within hours, calling his last words a final call to action. Social media erupted. Fans shared clips of his old films, overlaying them with quotes from the tribute. Hashtags with his name spread across platforms, not just as a memorial, but as a movement. Younger generations who barely knew his work now wanted to understand why his words carried such weight. But it wasn't just fans who were shaken. Hollywood insiders began to ask uncomfortable questions. Had Redford seen the decline of the industry coming? Was he warning them about the loss of authenticity? Some whispered that he had grown bitter toward the machine he once fought to reform. And yet, others said his words were not bitterness at all, but hope, a reminder that the values he stood for, truth, love, and rebellion against conformity, were still worth fighting for. But then came the part of the tribute no one saw coming. The revelations his wife shared about the man behind the legend. Her tribute could have ended with those last words. It would have been enough, but she chose to go further, pulling back the curtain on the side of Robert Redford few had ever seen. She spoke about the struggles he hid from the world, his frustration with Hollywood executives who tried to silence him, the nights he doubted whether Sundance would survive, the battles with illness and exhaustion that he kept private to avoid burdening those around him. Even in his later years, she said, Robert carried regrets, moments where he wondered if he had done enough. The crowd listened in shock. This wasn't the flawless golden boy they remembered from the screen. This was a man who doubted, who stumbled, who felt the same weight of failure as anyone else. And yet, through it all, he had one constant, the love that carried him to the end. Tears spread across the hall as she described the quiet acts of generosity he never wanted revealed. Funding struggling filmmakers anonymously, donating to causes without attaching his name, offering advice in private that changed lives but never made headlines. In that moment, Hollywood realized the full truth. Robert Redford's last words weren't only about loss, they were about the hidden fight he carried until his final breath, and the legacy he wanted others to continue. And as the silence settled once more, one thing became undeniable. His wife's tribute had transformed a funeral into something else entirely, a reckoning for Hollywood itself. As her voice faded, the weight of the tribute hung in the air. For a moment, even the cameras stopped clicking. No one dared to break the silence. Everyone present knew they weren't just saying goodbye to Robert Redford. They were witnessing the final chapter of an era. For decades, he had been more than a star. He was a compass, a reminder of what Hollywood once stood for. His passing, paired with the haunting final words his wife revealed, felt like the end of something larger than life. The young actors in the room shifted uneasily. The veterans bowed their heads, remembering what it meant to stand alongside him. And fans watching from afar realized they were looking at the last rebel of a vanishing age. It wasn't just the man they mourned, it was the certainty that Hollywood may never again produce a figure like him. But his wife's tribute carried one more message, a reminder that while Robert Redford may be gone, his legacy was a challenge to everyone left behind. Robert Redford's funeral wasn't just a memorial, it was a moment that stripped Hollywood of its glamour and forced it to face something deeper. His wife's tribute, her tears, and above all, his last whispered words turned a farewell into a reckoning. Those words weren't rehearsed or polished, they were real, fragile, and eternal. They spoke of love, of regret, and of a world he believed could still be better. They weren't just for her, they were for all of us. As Hollywood mourned, the meaning of his farewell began to spread. His words became headlines, hashtags, conversations at dinner tables and film schools. His final message had reached further than any movie premiere, further than any award ceremony. And that is the true mark of a legend. Not the fame, not the fortune, not even the awards, but the power to speak from the edge of life and still shape the future. So now the question lingers. Were Robert Redford's last words simply a husband's goodbye, or were they a final warning to Hollywood itself?